It's actually more valuable to you as a nonprofit leader to know whether or not you're making a difference. And we're here to be your partner in that. And we're working on trying to re-educate donors
Yeah.
to move them away from overhead so that they actually start looking at impact.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Kamen, your illustrious host for Nonprofit on the Rocks and co-founder of Envision Consulting, which is a national nonprofit consulting company working in strategy, in mergers, and in recruiting for only nonprofits across the country. And with us, as always, is Ashley Watterson, our producer. How you doing, Ashley?
I'm doing great, Matt. Looking forward to Thanksgiving.
Are you? So, I feel like last year when we did our Thanksgiving show, we talked about the waffle sandwich, didn't we?
Oh my gosh, that is right. Listener, if you missed that show, Matt told me about the ingenious use of your stuffing in a waffle maker to create the bread for a sandwich. And I am so glad he brought that up because I had completely forgotten about it.
I know. As somebody who, as you know, doesn't eat carbs, it is the one time of year I allow it. And I know we talked about it last time, but that's okay. Can you just imagine? So you have this waffle of stuffing, and then you put cranberry sauce all over it, and you just put everything else in there. I'm so hungry right now. I can't even begin to tell you.
And the sandwich the day after Thanksgiving is my favorite. And I do spare no ingredient. I put the entire Thanksgiving meal in between a sandwich. But honestly, my least favorite part of that sandwich is the bread, ironically. But if you are turning the stuffing into a waffle to make the bread,
Right?
well, now you've just blown my mind.
Right? Again, the stuffing. It is just
I mean, honestly, please tell me in what poll would stuffing not by a landslide win in terms of favorite side? No one chooses turkey. Turkey's the worst. It's so dry.
Can I tell you something? It's a secret. I'm not telling the
Okay.
family. So between you and me, Ashley, I love Peking duck. And so they make Peking turkey, which for me, I don't like turkey. And if you had it in Peking style turkey, oh my God, it's so good. So I'm very excited because this year it's going to be all about Peking turkey. However, what I got into a fight about here at the office is we do a staff lunch for Thanksgiving. I like stuffing with pork sausage in it.
Yeah.
And we have vegetarians on staff. And I'm going to be honest, I don't care. That's their choice. So I asked for stuffing with sausage and I did not get it. And I feel like that's grounds for termination. They're not a protected class yet, right? What do you think, Ashley?
Well, I definitely think that being a vegetarian in general is grounds for termination.
Fair.
So,
Fair.
but I need to back up for 1 second about the whole Peking turkey thing
Hmm.
because call me naive. I thought that Peking duck, I don't know, did I think it was a Chinese duck? I didn't think of it as a style of food. And I am so confused about how you can cook a turkey in the style of a duck. So you're going to have to educate me and maybe a listener out there who is also an idiot and doesn't understand.
I
How is this possible?
I have no idea how it's made, to be perfectly honest with you. I
You're
don't
like,
cook.
actually, nobody asked how the sausage gets made or the duck. I just know it's delicious. And it's not a duck from Peking that
Yeah,
is shipped over here.
it is not a duck from Peking. It is actually a style of how you make it. And I don't want to know how sausage is made because if I knew how sausage was made, I would never want to eat it.
And you would
So,
never get that stuffing again that you
no,
love so much
no,
and
no.
that you
Well,
fire people over not wanting.
correct. On my Thanksgiving potluck at the office, I did not get my favorite stuffing with sausage because of the vegetarians in here. My staff does not care about my happiness, and that is the whole point of my tirade. So, Ashley, now that we've bored our listeners about Thanksgiving, I think that it is the perfect time to talk about Giving Tuesday, and then we can talk about our next guest. So, do you do anything special for Giving Tuesday, Ashley?
Wow, putting me on the spot. I do now. Starting this Giving Tuesday. I'll be honest, I do a lot of year-end giving, and so I don't participate specifically on Giving Tuesday, but I think it is an awesome tradition.
Yeah, so Giving Tuesday is cool for those of us out there who don't know. We spend a lot of money on Thanksgiving on Black Friday, and then there's Cyber Monday. So Giving Tuesday is all about giving whatever money you have left over that you haven't spent to the nonprofits in your life. It's a really wonderful day as we go into Thanksgiving, as we talk about what we're thankful for. There are a lot of other people out there who need our donations, especially in this nonprofit space.
Well, I'm glad you pointed out that Giving Tuesday is the counterbalance to Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And I would just like to say, in my defense, since I admitted that I don't give on Giving Tuesday, I also don't participate in the Black Friday, Cyber Monday craziness. So do I get like a pass in that way?
Ashley, here's what I'm hearing, that not only do you not give to nonprofits, but you also don't contribute to the economy of the country by spending money on Black Friday or Cyber Monday. So really, you are just hoarding all your money and not helping the world. That's what I'm getting out of all of this.
Yeah, that's it. Nobody's getting any gifts at Christmas, and no charities get my money either. You have totally taken away the message I was going for.
No, it's fine. At the end of the day, honestly, if people don't give for Giving Tuesday, that's okay. We want you to, but if you don't give on Giving Tuesday, year-end appeals, year-end giving is just as important. And hopefully, again, what you'll learn from this show is how to pick a nonprofit and then what to look at when you're thinking about donating, and actually then going in to their website and making a donation. It means the world of difference to everybody that we serve in this amazing industry. So, Michael Thatcher is the president and CEO of Charity Navigator. And Charity Navigator is a wonderful resource for anybody out there who wants to look at a nonprofit and see how they're rated. So, you're going to hear a lot on this show about how Charity Navigator does their thing, how they figure out the star ratings for the nonprofits. There are millions of nonprofits across this country. We all want to figure out where to give and how our money is spent and where it's spent the best. Charity Navigator is the site to look at. And Michael's story about how he got there, but then also what he's doing and how he's impacting all of these nonprofits across the country is huge. And I am, again, so excited to air this show now around Thanksgiving.
Matt, do you think it would be fair to say that Charity Navigator is the Michelin guide of the nonprofit world?
Yes, I think that should be their motto. Actually, I do.
All right, cue up to this amazing conversation with Michael Thatcher. And before we get there, just a reminder that if you want more information about this show, about Michael Thatcher, about links to Charity Navigator, you can find us on our web, envisionnonprofit.com, and we are also streaming on YouTube.
Hey, Michael, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Matt. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to have you here. It is 2 o'clock in LA, and as is the title of the show, I am a true professional, and I've got my cocktail of choice in my hand. But yes, it's 2 o'clock, but it's 5 o'clock by you. What are you drinking tonight?
I'm having Panamanian rum on the rocks with a little bit of soda.
Wow, that sounds really good. Well,
cheers.
Cheers to you. Panamanian rum. I have not been to Panama. No, that's a lie. I did go to the canal, but I didn't have any rum. That sounds very delicious.
They have very nice rum. There's it's called flower of the cane, flor de cana.
Oh yeah, of course. I didn't know that was Panamanian. All right.
Yep.
I've learned something already. So I want you to know that my office is geeking out over this interview. So just so you know, you've got an enormous amount of fans here, me included. And we have so many questions. I've got questions from my team. I have questions from the audience, and then, just my own. But before we talk about all the things charity, I wanted to know from you, you have such an interesting background, like just such a cool background. And the one thing I just learned, by the way, is that you live in Montauk, the end of Long Island, and you surf.
I do surf. Yeah, I've been surfing since I was 4 years old. My dad was a surfer.
So cool. Did he compete?
No. He was a professional oceanographer and an ocean engineer. We were always around the ocean, and the ocean was a huge part of my life as a kid, and it's my happy place. So,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I feel like I can't even like get out to the waves in the ocean, even if I wanted to. So just very impressed by anybody who's that athletic.
Yeah.
But your experience is really interesting. I mean, you have a degree in music from Columbia, right? You've got the oceanic research background, so much cool stuff. why nonprofit? Like, I mean, you were at Microsoft. Like, why nonprofit? Why this gig?
This doesn't show up prominently in my resume, but I was a musician. I also ran a dance company for the first 10 years of my life. We were a 501c3 nonprofit based in New York City and struggled. Couldn't make a living doing it, so got into the tech side to support myself. Hated fundraising, hated not doing my art and just chasing money. The irony is, I really care about a lot of different things. I learned how technology is such a powerful lever for transformation and change. And the last 10 years that I was at Microsoft, I was working as a chief technology officer in their public sector vertical. And I spent 5 years looking after Middle East and Africa, and then 5 years for Greater Asia. And all the work we did was really about social and economic mobility within developing nations, developed nations, but it was always interfacing with the local NGOs and nonprofits in those countries. And figuring out how to talk about the difference that we were making on multiple scales. What are we doing? How is Microsoft, in this case, making a difference in your country? And then at the same time, to the powers that be at Microsoft, why are we spending all this money on this stuff, right? And so anyway, it was a really interesting set of measurement challenges and tension points. But at the end of the day, it was about making a difference. And I went through a life change. I was living in Singapore, and my wife got sick in 2011. And in 2013, she passed away. And that changed everything. And I went through a little over a year of transition of trying to figure out what to do, exited Microsoft, and was looking at opportunities where I could make a difference. And then a friend of mine who knew my predecessor at Charity Navigator knew that they were looking for someone with a technology background. I had no clue what Charity Navigator was. I'd been living out of the country for 10 years, right? I fell in love with the idea of helping individual donors in higher performing nonprofits, and just saw, wait a minute, we can make a difference in oceanography, we can make a difference in the arts, we can make a difference in education, we can make a difference in homelessness, in global poverty. And big light bulb went off. I was like, wow, I don't have to choose. I get to be CEO. And I really was at a point in my career where I wanted to try running an organization, and I was ready to go home. And so coming back to New York was important. When I saw what Charity Navigator was and realized, we had a lot of work to do. And I've been here a little over 9 years now, and we still have a lot of work to do. But I feel like we've made a dent in some of it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. So I didn't know that you started a nonprofit and you didn't like fundraising. And the funny thing is you're running a nonprofit. So do you have to fundraise for Charity Navigator?
A lot of people don't realize this, but about 60% of our funding comes from individual donors. We have foundations that are covering about 30% of our revenue, and then we have about 10% coming from major donors, and then the rest is board and data sales. And so we're very dependent on donations. Yeah, so I fundraise.
Isn't that funny how it comes full circle, by the way?
It's twisted. Life has a way of saying, "Oh, you don't like this? All right, go do something else for a while. You get to come back and do it some more when you're a little bit older."
That's really funny. That's really funny. Honestly, I figured you were funded by foundations. I had no idea that it was 60% individuals. So here's my question. Do you rate yourself on your site?
We do. We rate ourselves. We are a 4-star charity. We are also platinum seal of transparency from Candid. And we also have had the BBB's Wise Giving Alliance seal of excellence and passed all their standards. That's a funny story. When I first got here, we didn't rate ourselves. And I remember saying, wait a minute, there's something funny about that, right? And there's a credibility piece and sort of a super quick history of Charity Navigator. We were founded in 2001. We were a private foundation for the first 12 years of our existence. So we had a benefactor that really took care of everything, so the organization could really just focus on what it was doing and establishing itself. We then transitioned to becoming a 501c3, and moved away from, Pat Dugan's money to really finding money from foundations and from individual donors. But that's been an essential part of who we are. And I think one of the things that's also important to know is that we are the largest independent evaluator of nonprofits in the United States. We also have really significant amount of traffic. We're kind of the name that people go to. What that implies is that we have to be accessible to the general public, right? So it's a consumer product that is in the rating. We want it to be the best rating that we can be, but it also has to be accessible to the average donor who may or may not have sort of an in-depth analysis of what impact means and what good means. Yeah.
Yeah, I do love that you rate yourself.
Yeah.
And, so I'm a consultant and I do a lot of recruiting for a living. And I love asking questions of candidates. One of my favorite questions to ask, especially for somebody who's applying for a CEO position of a nonprofit, is how do you know if you're doing a good job? How actually do you know if you're making an impact? Like, if you take this job, how are you going to figure that out? Really? And that's what you do at Charity Navigator. So I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. So tell me, just like in general, what makes a good nonprofit?
I'll try and speak to it from a ratings perspective, but I think what makes a good nonprofit, and I like you called it out in that way because sometimes when you look at impact assessments, it's looking at program impact. It's not looking at the nonprofit.
Mm.
And what we're trying to do is help people see what's a good nonprofit. That includes impact, right? In other words, you want a nonprofit to have impact. So impact is important. The ability to actually have a mission statement that you're delivering on that mission in some kind of a way that you can articulate, right? So what's your mission and what are you doing? And so there's mission alignment. So activities mapped to mission. I think it's essential to have strong leadership. I also think it's essential to have healthy finances. You have streams of income you're able to manage well. And then I think the other thing that we look at and we really care about is good governance and independent governance, because that can get you into a world of hurt. And then the other area that I think we're looking at, and that it's ironically what brought me to Charity Navigator, was how do you incorporate feedback from those that you are serving
Mm.
in what you're doing and how you measure and even articulate your own impact, right? Because so often I know what's best for you. Here you go. And I kind of jam it down your throat. And the beneficiary, that's like, no, not what I needed, not what I wanted. And actually you're hurting me, right? So beneficiary feedback is I joined the board of an organization called Keystone Accountability when I was still living in Singapore. And Keystone looks at beneficiary voice and ways of doing that in a way that you factor out biases and different things. And that always fascinated me because there were so many interventions I did also as a technologist where it was we knew best and we came and just, pushed this into a country. And it was like, oh, so yeah, that's maybe not as crisp as it needs to be, but I think that's a general description of what I would say goodness is.
Eh, This is a problem. This is like a 1 hour show because I have so many follow-up questions for this. It's a problem for me. But I want to start from feedback because I think that is so interesting, right? So I ran a homeless shelter, and I will tell you that we did actually start feedback. And it was so interesting. Because you're right. We do think we know better. We do think we know what we should be doing. So I ran a homeless shelter for foster youth. The organization before I took over was not making sure that kids went to school. They decided they didn't need to send kids to school, that they would leave it up to the kids. I changed that. When I came in, I was like, no, I'm sorry, you have to go to school. Like that's part of, you just have to go to school. And I had kids pull out, right? And they would fill out forms at how angry that they were that we had rules, right? That I actually had rules and structure for them to be in the program. When I ran the homeless shelter in New Jersey for adults, we drug tested and it was a
Yep.
zero tolerance organization. And I can tell you that the clients that I kicked out would not have been happy. So, how do you incorporate that feedback?
I'll answer that question, but also it speaks about how we try and create our ratings. And that is, we are by far not the smartest people on the block, but we have the platform that is being used by millions, right? So let's get the smartest people to work together and try and come up with methodologies. Where can we join with others? Where can we facilitate best practices? And so the way we're doing feedback right now is there's a group of people or entities that care about feedback. We call ourselves the Irritants for Change.
Ah,
But it's folks like Feedback Labs, 60 Decibels, Candid, Charity Navigator. But what we came up with was what's a good framework for ensuring that feedback is being incorporated. And so we came up with a set of questions. So it's a framework that we call How You Listen. And this data is currently collected by Candid, and then we acquire that data from Candid and then score it. In other words, does your organization collect feedback? How does your organization use that feedback? So it's very meta. It's not looking at the specific feedback. It's looking at that you collect feedback, you use it to change your program engagement. What challenge does your organization face in collecting feedback and how are you addressing that? We're looking at the practice of feedback, not the actuality of it. That's the way we've approached it right now.
that makes sense. If they do it, that makes sense. Whether or not it's great is another thing, but that's really interesting.
But feedback,
Um,
I want to stay on one thing about feedback that I think is important is that it's a fluid metric, right? We do annual ratings. And there's a fluidity to it, right? You go through a period where things are going well, you adjust things, it gets better. You adjust things again and it gets worse. You've got to be tracking it. So I think the behavior is what's most important. The score is less important.
that's interesting. I do like that. I have a lot of friends in nonprofit and they don't. I think one of the positions that's really important is some kind of alumni
Mm,
position that is, checking in with clients who have graduated the program or dropped out of the program, whatever it is, and they don't have the funding for those positions. It's one thing for me to say 80% of my clients move on to affordable housing, but then what happens? How do I know that they stay there? What's the recidivism rate? And that money I never had to hire somebody. And I think that that would be really important. So that feedback piece is very important, but I know a lot of my friends don't have that funding. But I love
yeah.
that that's part of the deal.
Yep. Oh,
So
yeah.
let's talk about leadership because that's my world. That's what I do for a living. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that there are a lot of executive directors out there. I don't think a lot of them are very good at what they do, or else I didn't have a job. So I'm curious. You said strong leadership, right? What makes strong leadership and how do you know that?
So this is going to sound terrible, and particularly coming from someone who's running an evaluation entity, but you know it when you see it, right? I think elements of strong leadership is listening, right? Go back to the feedback piece. And with that is adaptability. There's perseverance. There's the ability to work with others. We're not able to do a meaningful assessment of an individual leader, right? I would say the one thing that we're looking for is that there's mission alignment. You have some strategies to achieve that mission. How, as an organization, are you investing in your leaders? Right. So we're looking at, do you pay to grow your people or are you just focused on overheads, which, we should probably talk about overhead at some point, right?
Oh, we will. We will. We
Because,
will.
that was kind of what we were known for. It's definitely what we want to be forgotten for, right? It's not the right measurement. But I think if you don't invest in your people, you're extracting value from them
Yeah.
and you need to be creating value for them. And so I think that's an element that I look at in leadership. And then the last piece, and we don't really rate this other than we collect data and let donors look at it. But tell us an adaptability story. And I think this came into our ratings during COVID because COVID was a moment that was, for many organizations, was a make or break moment. And so to your point about, there's some not so great leaders out there. This was a chance to either show up or shut down. A challenge. There's another part, and we don't have a good way of measuring this right now, but I think it's another weak spot in the nonprofit structure, and that is boards. It can be the most random element, and it can be the most constructive, helpful element, and it can be the most destructive. And they're volunteers, right? What was a friend told me once? it's really hard to fire volunteers.
It's again, like I said, I can literally spend like days with you. And
Yeah,
I'm going to keep myself on track, but I do want to respond to a few things because I think it's really important. We'll go to the finance piece in a second. With
sure.
leadership piece, I'm curious. This is data. And there's only so much you can do. There's so many nonprofits, there's only so much you can do to rate them when it comes to not quantitative, but qualitative. I'm curious if there were a way that a nonprofit would actually be open to some kind of like, maybe not a 360 review of the executive director, but some kind of review for the leadership team. And I don't really know what that looks like at all. But how cool would that be if me as a potential funder could get some kind of like actual internal review of leadership? And staff don't always love their boss anyway, but that'd be really interesting.
So here's an idea. I'm not saying we would do this, but there's a compensation committee on Charity Navigators Board. Every year, I have a performance assessment, and it's not a 360 of every person on board and staff, but it's a subset. I'm wondering if there were a way to have an aggregate score from that. I would be willing to post that. And
Right?
maybe some verbatim. So you could almost think of it like a net promoter system, right? Where here's my score this year, and here are a couple of verbatims that align with that. I mean, I have no issue with that. In other words, we're all about transparency, and I share with my staff when board was happy, board wasn't happy. We all basically, no one's getting astronomical raises or bonuses, right? So we're not in that kind of work. But I think it's important. And I think as a leader, it's important for me to be transparent about that.
Yeah.
What's harder about that is if I'm a bad leader, I'm not showing you that stuff,
Right.
right? And if it's demanded by the donors, then maybe I have no choice. And I think that's it's edgy, but I don't know. You're the management consultant. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Look at that. See something new. There was one question in an interview that you got that something's new. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
When we buy items from like Nike or whatever it is, do we care about how the leadership is? When we make a donation to a nonprofit, should we care how the leadership is? And how do you evaluate that? I love the idea of doing some kind of rating of leadership, yes. But sometimes when you're the boss of a nonprofit, you aren't going to be like, you have to run like a for-profit every once in a while. And I'm just so curious how you would do that. But I do love that idea. I absolutely love that idea. And
Yeah.
we will talk about funding and finances because of the admin, but one of the questions that I have for you, and we'll get there, is so many of our nonprofits are funded by taxpayer dollars. So many of our nonprofits are funded by government contracts. And how then do you gauge a CEO of a nonprofit being funded by a contract that's telling you what to do versus you, for example, that's running a nonprofit that isn't funded by government contracts and isn't telling you what to do? So, I mean, just there's so much there, but I'd love to see you post something about nonprofits leadership. I think that'd be really cool.
What if we could do that as a kind of voluntary assessment? We've never done that. But what if you did it as a voluntary thing to just see if it resonated with the donor population
Mhm. Yeah.
and
Good.
and to see what the uptake was from nonprofit leaders?
Yeah. Or you can
You
bring
know,
together just a quick think tank of nonprofit leaders and donors and say, what do you honestly care? And if you did, what would make you not donate, for example? How cool. See, how
yeah,
cool is this? Oh, I'm
yeah.
very excited. I'm very excited.
Well, I'll commit to something in the way we create our ratings, and this is a big change over the last, probably 5, 6 years. We're not doing this on our own. Like I said, collaboration is one of our core values. We have a consultative council of nonprofit leaders, and it's a group of about 30 leaders from the sector, from large, small, all over the country, different demographics. We're really trying to have a very diverse group.
Hmm.
I'll take this question to that group in a future meeting and just sort of see what would you think and literally challenge each one of them. Would you be willing to post some kind of an anonymized 360 score of your annual performance review? And do you think that's a valid measure? Because I think that's the other thing. You might say that, my board and staff are biased, and that's not how you should be assessing my value as a CEO. Because ultimately, you also want to look at my results, right?
And how am I
What
funded?
have we done?
I'm excited. I'm excited. We're gonna like revisit this in like, let's say 6 months and see. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so curious. Okay, so on the same idea, we're gonna move over to boards for a second because let me tell you, boards can make or break an executive director, period. The thing that I don't miss at all about being an executive director of a nonprofit is my board. Now, the funny thing is, I have 100 clients a year and I have 100 boards as my boss a year. That being said, they're not permanent. Our most popular blog that we wrote at Envision over the last 12 years, the most popular still, is Bully on a Board. And I
Hmm.
tell you, the times that we've fired a client has been because of a bully on a board. And there's only so much you can do about it. So, one of the ways that you rate nonprofits is the board. So, how do you do that?
So I'm smiling because as the CEO, if you can't manage your board, so maybe the CEO assessment metric, in other words, how well are you working with your board? If you're not working well with your board and you haven't managed that relationship, maybe you're not able to manage the organization, right? And part of that is how have you set up structures with your board? There's so many situations that you walk into as a leader that you just didn't know until you got there. And sometimes structures are set up that are quite difficult. Our own system as an organization, we've evolved and our board has massively evolved over 20 some odd years we've been around. We were first set up as a nonprofit, a founders board, right? Friends and family. And then we had no term limits. So people were on forever.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is a
And
problem.
and no, but it's like you start seeing that, you're like realizing, wow, if I have a problem person, there's no way to actually move through that person other than voting them off the board, which is really acrimonious, and you never really want to do that. And then so it's a question of just like bringing in structures to set up natural attrition and then committees. And I would assume as a CEO, you have a voice in the structure of the board in some of the recruiting process. Not always. You also there's so many different types of boards,
There are working boards.
money boards versus functional boards.
So, I'll give you a real life example. Because I do agree with you being an executive director, yeah, your job is to, for sure, work and help manage your board. However, there are some real assholes out there, and I've worked with them. And there's a board chair that there was an attempted coup by the rest of the board to get that person kicked off the board because this person was, and look, I deal with a lot of people. I'm going to say this, and I'm not hyperbolic. This person was a disgusting human being, truly disgusting human being. It was only on the board for ego. And also, I think that this person wanted to make money at some point and thought that they could. That being said, there was an attempted coup. They didn't get him off, and half the board left, and the CEO was stuck. So I do think, yes, that there are those opportunities, but then there are just terrible people. So, I do think that measuring the board isn't, I just don't know how you do it. I think you can do things like term limits and give gets and all that stuff, sure. But there's only so much you can do.
We will be right back.
So every single CEO or board member comes to us and says, hey, how do we find new board members? How do we get board members to fundraise? How do we work together as a team? What if we have a bully on our board? We don't really love our executive director. How do we deal with this? We don't love our board chair. How do we deal with this? So Board Builders is all of it. It is a coaching program. It's a monthly subscription, and it's also quarterly happy hour events to find you new board members. It is such a cool program. I'm so proud of it. So for any of you out there who are interested in learning more about Board Builders, who have questions about their board, who want to bring on new board members, who don't quite know, how to run a board meeting or how to be interesting or how to fundraise or just want some coaching, please, please, please check us out. Go to our website at envisionnonprofit.com.
And now back to the show.
So, in terms of like a phenomenal board, can you give me an example of a board that you just, not the name of the board, but just a board that was spectacular and what made it spectacular?
There's a big difference between management and governance, right? And there are times when the leader needs support. They've got to manage the organization. And this actually I lived. I had a situation where there was some personnel difficulties at senior levels. And having the board chair who had my back as we navigated through these situations that was a game changer. And what the board chair also did, which was really important, was ran interference with the rest of the board. Basically kept people abreast of what they needed to know, provided the support that I needed, and then helped us work through the difficult situation that we were in. And then at the end of it, we kind of like, shook hands and went back to doing business, right? And it was one of those moments where, let's go back to something I said before. This is my first CEO position. And I made some really dumb mistakes as I was going. And if I hadn't had a good board chair helping me in those early moments, it could have been a mess. And we were at a point where we were already fragile, right? So it was essential to have someone that was just there. And he didn't do anything other than support.
Yeah.
That was a game changer.
Listen, I think a board, and specifically a board chair, truly can make or break a relationship with the CEO and then a nonprofit. It is huge. And again, we do recruiting, and the reason why so many of our executive directors leave is due to their board. It's many shows that I've done talking about board. Anybody listening to this can go back and listen to like half of the shows that we've done. So now let's talk about financials, because I'd love to hear how you've changed. We in the nonprofit sector were always annoyed by the overhead 80/20 rule. And I, as an executive director, was always annoyed because I was like, if all of that money goes to programs, then I don't have admin. And there was a book that I read, I don't remember what it was called, but it was something like, if nonprofits around the world, we'd all still be using a typewriter. So tell me, how have you changed this lovely 80/20 rule?
We've changed it in significant ways. We started with a very, very strong focus on overhead. We did not invent overhead measurement or go back to government grants. How many government grants actually pay any overhead, right? So it's like emulating what was best practices back in the early 2000s and just mainstreamed it and brought it to the general public. Taking it away from the general public is hard, right? Sort of changing behaviors now is super hard. I'm going to be a little bit provocative in this too, because I think the one thing that nonprofits figured out was how to file a 990 so that they could manage to the 80/20 rule.
Matt, I'm not sure everybody knows what the 80/20 rule is. Could you please Matt-splain us?
The 80/20 rule is 80% of your dollars coming in go to program, 20% of your dollars coming in go to admin, and admin could be anything that has to do with everything other than working directly with whatever it is that your mission is. And I will just tell you on that, what you just said for the 990, I did. So when I was an executive director, let me tell you, 100% of my time pretty much was spent fundraising. Just was, every day I was fundraising. But of course, that's not what I'm going to put in the 990, because I want that 80/20 rule.
Yep. In other words, that ratio it's easy to manage to, it's easy to understand and go back to. For someone who's not an evaluator and who wants a simple rule of thumb measurement for how to assess a good organization, that was such a convenient metric. Sadly, it's such a wrong metric, right? Because it tells you where the money was spent. It doesn't tell you what the money accomplished. Charity Navigator's rating up until 2020 was really optimized towards overhead. And it wasn't 80/20. It was like if you could get to 99.9% program expense, that's where you had the most points. In 2020, we changed the rating. We brought in a new system. We're calling it the Encompass rating system. It's looking at impact and measurement, accountability and finance. So there is still a financial assessment. Culture and community, that's where the feedback comes in, and then leadership and adaptability. We went from an absolute score in overhead to reducing it, which was taking up the majority of the overall score, to making it's one metric out of about 50 metrics. And it's a threshold metric. Once you get to 70% program expense, we stop counting. So you go to 71, 72, or you go to 99. We don't care, right? You'll get all the points available for overhead. and that's fine. Let's say you're less than 50% of your money is going to program. As a donor, I should be asking you questions. Why is this?
Sure.
That's unusual, right? We leaned into that so heavily for the first decade of our existence that it's kind of what we became known for. And we weren't really looking for feedback. And I got so much feedback on that when I first joined. It was such a, and it was a wonderful thing. And I had been working in, different development efforts, and I just knew it. You got to pay what it takes. And it's no longer the core. And I actually care more about governance than I care about overhead. We haven't removed it from the assessment.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of reasons for that. It is still worth knowing how efficient you are. I think as a leader, if I'm not managing that, there's a problem, right? But it's also important to know that I've got reserves, for example. The last thing I want to say on this, though, and this is where I say I want to be a little bit provocative. If you only tell your overhead story to your donors, which many nonprofits do, they advertise X percent or, so many cents on the dollar go to pure program, you're propagating the problem. And what we have found with the new rating system that we've brought online, which requires nonprofits to actually supply data to us, they're not necessarily doing it because they've learned how to manage the scores. We've actually lowered the demand, or let's say the stringency on the financial metrics, because we want to focus on impact. We want to focus on how you're actually self-assessing your own impact. And we're not quite getting that data right now. And it's because there's more risk involved, right? But it's actually, I think, more valuable to you as a nonprofit leader to know whether or not you're making a difference and use us to help you in that, right? We're here to be your partner in that. And I think that's a change management element that we have to work on in our relationship with the sector. And we're working on the same thing and trying to re-educate donors to move them away from overhead so that they actually start looking at impact. But if there's no impact to talk about, they're going to fall back on overhead again. And we all lose.
We all do lose. Nothing makes me happier than what you just said. And I hugely agree that we need to focus on impact. Overhead is important, just like you said. I mean, I'm running a business. Overhead matters. If I'm spending 90% of my money on benefits and 10% is going to my clients, this is not good. Overhead does matter, but it shouldn't be that, 80/20, or it was actually, I think, 85/15 rule when I was an executive director now. I do agree with you. I also think that unfortunately, because that was the rule for so long, that's what donors know. And that's what nonprofits are playing to because they have to raise money, so they have to. And I think what you just said, that's going to be the job of organizations like yours to continue to educate donors. It's not the nonprofits that I'm worried about, it's the donors. So today I had a therapy appointment. Because I'm very LA, Michael, and I went to a therapist. I go to a therapist every week. And I asked her.
I do too. So
Yeah,
it's a New York thing too, but
New York, LA thing, right? And I asked her, I said, have you heard of Charity Navigator? And she said, no. And I said, okay. How do you decide how to give to a nonprofit? She said, I've never really thought about that. I said, well, do you ever do any research on that nonprofit? And she said, no. And I said, okay, so if you're giving money to a nonprofit, do you care how much of that money goes to the client that they serve? And she said, yeah, absolutely. I would expect the majority of that money to go to that. And I was like, okay, well, you've heard that from somewhere, but that isn't actually what we had a little bit of a conversation, even though it was still on my dime. I
I
have it on
know.
my, Michael, I spent 10 minutes of my time talking about you. So
Well,
just so you know,
that's
uh,
overhead, man.
yeah, that's real overhead. That's funny. That's really funny. So it is out there, and I do think that it is the responsibility of all of us to re-educate donors. And I'm so happy to hear you say that. And so I'm gonna ask you like live here on the show for the one listener that we have. Can I say to people who are thinking about making donations, hey, I interviewed Michael, the CEO of Charity Navigator, and he said to me that rule, that 80/20 rule or 85/15 rule is not the rule that you should go by any longer. Do I have your
It's
okay to say that?
100% is categorically not the rule, and it doesn't tell you anything about an organization's impact. It just tells you about their efficiencies,
Thank you.
or worse, just how they filled out their 990.
Yeah. And I will agree with you, and I will back that up that all of us lie on that. That is like the most important thing I can get out of this show. Thank you. Okay, so I have some questions from the audience, but before I do that, I have one last question for you. I told you I was going to ask you a question that was unfair. Of the nonprofits in this country that are doing their work and are actually functioning, what do you think the percentage is of those nonprofits that are actually delivering on what they tell you that they should be doing?
That's a super hard question. And let me tell you how we've approached assessing that and also why we took the route that we did. If you go back to the overhead discussion or another donor behavior, which is skepticism. And what I've found is that a lot of donors, the fear about overhead and the question that I often get, I get it from media, I get it from donors, is how to avoid a scam, how to not get ripped off by the nonprofit. And my observation is that most nonprofits are not scamming people. Most nonprofits are doing their best. What best means has a huge variance.
Mhm.
We talked about sort of the leadership is often questionable. Boards are often questionable, and that can lead to mediocre results. But then you have organizations, and if you put on more of an effective altruist approach to things, where you're looking at things in a very stringent way of like lowest cost per outcome in this particular scenario, you probably have less organizations that are really sort of hitting it out of the park. But you have the vast majority of organizations that are actually they're doing okay and have the ability to get better at doing that. And so I'm a little bit avoiding your question head on because I don't feel that I can answer it with data. But the data that I do have is that the majority aren't bullshitting you, right? They're really doing their best. And I think it's the donor's job to figure out, what best is. And then it's our job as an evaluator to help those that are actually willing to submit the data and actually do the analysis to help them get better at what they're doing so that we have a more efficient and a more effective nonprofit sector.
Thank you. And I fully agree with you. And that is, I think, the answer, right? Like you can't
Yeah.
give me a number, but I think, and I talked about this before, and I stand behind it. If our taxpayer dollars stopped going to fund those large nonprofits and we as individuals took those dollars when we decided where to give that money to, I think that that would be really interesting. I don't love how nonprofits are funded by organizations like Department of Mental Health or DCFS or things like that because they're being told this is how you spend your money. But it isn't necessarily fair. And they put an overhead on there and they do all these things that like not exactly fair. And so the question that I asked you is also really unfair because if you're funded by government contracts, then you can't tell me if you're doing a good job or not, right? Because that's what they're telling you to do. So it is, especially in the homeless space here in LA, government contracts are very like debilitating, I think. And that's again a whole other show. But when you are rating nonprofits, do you do any kind of rating based on the percentage of where the dollars are coming from?
We do. Let me be careful on how I answer this. We always wanted 30 or 40% of your revenue must come from individual donors
Mm.
in order for us to rate you.
Oh,
So
interesting.
that was the rule of thumb. That's been skewed a little bit right now, and we're actually starting to filter out the ones that 100% government contracts. You're a different creature than someone that's actually living off of individual donor dollars. And so right now we don't feel
Hmm.
qualified to rate those that are on a government contract. I still think there's a need for it. But the team has been looking at it more from the value of the donor dollars. And so I'd love to revisit this and maybe have you get my chief programs officer on to who's actually a really interesting person because she worked for USAID for well over a decade. She also worked in homelessness that government funded, and now she's working with us. And it's this is Laura Andes on our team, and I think she would be an interesting person to come in and talk about that and why we do what we do. Very specific on the ratings.
That would actually be really cool. By the way, I applied to USAID when I graduated UCLA and I did not get in. I would have like changed the complete trajectory of my life. So anybody who's listening to the show, it is really important to hear that. Those large nonprofits that are generally working in mental health or homelessness or developmentally disabled people, they are mainly majority funded by government contracts. And again, those contracts are funded by taxpayer dollars.
Yes.
So that is really important to know that at this point, Charity Navigator doesn't rate them because they're mainly funded by government contracts. And I find that to be so fascinating, Michael. So knowing now what I know, and if there were a donor that really was interested in giving to a nonprofit that was so funded by government contracts that they wouldn't be on your site, my question is there any way that a donor can go on to your website or look somewhere online and see, okay, this nonprofit that I want to give to, it's mainly funded by government. It's not going to be on our site because they don't fit our numbers or whatever it is. Is that information there, or they don't show up and the donor just can't find them?
So the Charity Navigator site has the full IRS Business Master File. So we have the 1.6 million nonprofits of all shapes and sizes. And so you'll find them. And you can also, if they're a legitimate 501c3 organization, you can give to them through our platform. We have a giving basket, and that allows you to, facilitate the transaction. So they may not have a rating, right? So we've got about 235,000 ratings right now, and a full universe of 1.6 million, right? And in that 1.6 million, you have churches and synagogues and mosques and all the houses of worship, universities, a lot of entities that people don't come to Charity Navigator to give to a university, right? You'll find them, but I don't know that we're the best vehicle for that. You give to your alma mater because they were your alma mater, right?
So actually, this is not something that I was actually going to ask you because it wasn't even on our radar, but I am just curious. Do you think that synagogues and mosques and churches should have to file a tax return so that we know what it is going on with their money?
I think that it depends. As a house of worship, you do not have to file the 990. You can take an exemption. You have organizations like the Salvation Army, Catholic Relief Services. They're churches, and they don't file a 990. So we don't rate them. We went through a time where we created a rating based on parallel filings that they gave us, but they still wouldn't file the 990. I think at the size that both those organizations are functioning, yes, there's some legal risk and some costs that are associated with filing a 990, but if you're looking for donor dollars and you're not transparent about donor dollars, I personally take an issue with that. And I think organizationally, we think transparency it ought to be aligned with your purpose and your mission to be providing services to humans, right? Which both organizations are.
Look, I agree. I think all religious organizations should have to file taxes because they get the majority of our dollars. And so if, the
Yep.
majority of our money is going to a religious organization, your temple, your mosque, your church, then I feel like it's fair for them to have to share. And, like the Church of Scientology, we have no idea where those dollars are going. And they're humongous. I think I could be mistaken, but they own, if not the most, then a huge majority of real estate here in Hollywood. And so I kind of feel like if I'm going to give you dollars, I should know where that goes.
I think a more interesting question, and I don't have the data to really speak to this, so you may or may not want to include this, but you can file a 990. And I think, and I'm saying this anecdotally, and I'd love to get the data on this, but there have been more synagogues that have filed 990s than any other religion that I'm aware of,
Really?
which is an interesting sort of data story. Like, what type of house of worship is more interested in transparency, and what does that say? And what are they doing? And I think it would be interesting to look at what are they doing. If it's just a synagogue, right? That's one thing. But if it's an education facility, if they have direct human services, that's worth knowing about. And I haven't looked at that in probably 6 years, but it was a point of interest to me when I first started.
I have so many shows that are spin-offs of this show. I can't even begin. I can't even keep all the notes. Like, I'm like, do we have enough listeners to continue this conversation with so many other options? Okay, so I have two last questions, and I do have a few from the audience. But
Yeah.
The first one is you have this massive responsibility and power of, putting this information out there. It's a huge deal.
Yep.
And on a Saturday night, you're thinking of Monday and going to the office or, logging on to go to the office. What keeps you up at night?
There are a couple of things. One is chasing money keeps me up at night.
Hmm.
And go back to something we said about, we are 60% of our revenue comes from individual donors, with the average donation being $44. There's a decline in giving right now in the United States. We're experiencing a bit of a giving crisis, or the money's moving in. It may not be moving to nonprofits. It may be moving more to direct support or mutual aid and other means. That affects our bottom line. And so that's something that I'm concerned with. I'm also concerned with the fact that Charity Navigator aspires to be the signal of trust for giving. And we've expanded our coverage, and we've sort of tried to make things better and make it a better representation. And there's a reverse correlation in terms of what's actually happening from a trust perspective, right? So
Hmm.
there's a decline in trust right now. A lot of that's not our responsibility, or we shouldn't take full accountability, but I can't help but taking accountability for it because we want to build trust. And that's something that keeps me awake at night. This used to keep me awake at night, and we've solved that with the scale. So when I joined Charity Navigator, we rated 8,000 organizations. We now rate 235,000 organizations. And the reason it kept me awake at night was I'd run into people and they'd say, I only give to Charity Navigator rated organizations. And I'd like tear my hair out saying, you're out of your minds because you're missing the majority of the universe, right? And so it was about how do we actually get adequate coverage? And that's going to keep growing. That number is going to keep growing. And so I'm happy about that. So that was one. I do worry about what if we get it wrong? And I think the way I combat that is people often say you shouldn't do anything until you get it right. And I was like, we're never going to get it right. We're only going to get it better. Right. And so I think that's part of how I've mitigated that. It's like if we get it wrong, I want to be able to fix fast. And so that's this sort of agile software mentality of like, do it, move fast, iterate, but you better be able to correct fast. And that also keeps you awake at night. And then the other is just making sure we have the right team and the right people, and that the people are okay. Because, we live in a dynamic world, and taking care of your people really matters.
It's such a hard job to be a manager. So yes, I hear you
Yeah.
on that. Okay, so here's what's so interesting, and this is my second question, right?
Yeah.
Here's a two-parter. So your job is to rate nonprofits. I talk a lot about horror stories of nonprofits and executive directors who have stolen and theft and all these things. And I realize that when people listen to this show, they love those horror stories and things like that. But at the end of the day, we are a nonprofit. We do good work. We are here to make an impact. Maybe we don't do it great. Maybe we're not amazing at it, but we're still there to do that. And I'm always afraid that if I say something that I'm going to make somebody maybe say, you know what? I'm not going to give money this year, right? Because maybe it's not that great. Maybe I don't know where my money's going. Maybe they're not doing the best, right? I still think at the end of the day, unless there's true theft, I mean, and there are some really terrible nonprofits who have done that, but it's not very many. You still need to give. So my first question to you is like, how do you deal with that? You're rating organizations, and sometimes you may not get them a great rating, and then maybe somebody won't give, but they're still making an impact. So how do you deal with that?
There are a couple of things. And, when bad things do happen, and bad things need to be brought to light. In other words, you want to avoid the nonprofit sector becoming a space for exploitation and bad behavior. We have what we call an alert system. It's had different names over the years, but basically what we're doing is there's a credible media investigation of a nonprofit, saying, the CEO has gone off with some money, or there's inappropriate behavior. There's another thing we look at is there's an attorney general's investigation of an organization or condemned wrongdoing. We issue warnings, that's kind of like a mark on your nonprofit profile saying, hey, donor, you should know about this. One of the ones that's problematic is you can have nonprofits that have gone out of business, but they're still soliciting.
Mhm.
And in that case, it's like, stay away, right? And we'll block giving to that organization. And so I do think policing is important, right? In other words, protect people from fraudulent behavior and show examples of when there's perjury or people are blatantly lying, shut them down. So that's one piece. The fact, go back to what I said about, getting it wrong. We try and fix things. If we make a mistake, we fix it right away. You have to do that. Part of what we've been trying to do is taking a, do no harm approach in the ratings. So giving folks the benefit of the doubt, but don't lie to me,
Yeah.
right? Because I will come after you. And then the other thing we did was when I first joined Charity Navigator, we have these lists of curated organizations that can be topical based on, hurricane and disaster recovery. They can also be best of. We used to have the 10 worst charities in the country. And that was by far our most popular list.
Of course.
It didn't generate any revenue for those organizations, but it got us a ton of traffic and it got me in front of the media. And one of the first things I did, it was within the first year I joined, was get rid of that list. We cannot be trying to be building a relationship with the sector and actually being an impartial evaluator if we're hanging people in this way. And it's just because they're poor performers. They're not bad. They're just poor performers. And so we scrap that. And we won't do business on that. I'm not going to do that kind of barrel scraping. I won't do it.
I so appreciate that. Of the organizations that I ran, two of them, I won't say which ones, but two of them had theft. The previous CEO had stolen a lot of money from both organizations, like a lot of money. And both of them could have shut down. And when I came in, I turned it around. But the thing is, had I said publicly, oh, by the way, there was this theft, and please trust me now, it wouldn't have worked. And so I did not share that information and turn the organization around and thank God they're still there and they're doing great. And that's hard because, my predecessors stole money and I was there to turn the place around. And it's like, where do you draw the line and where do you say, donors are rightfully so not going to give you money? And that to me was the hardest part of my job was
Sure.
wanting to make people understand that no, this is going to be fine and I'm going to turn it around. And yet this person stole $100,000, whatever it was, right? So that was difficult. That was really challenging.
And it's the whole transparency question of, how and when do you share?
Knowing that you rely on funding, right? Knowing that people will stop giving and then you can't fix it. So that's
Yep.
number one. And I don't think that there's an easy rule for that. And then my second question now, along the same lines, is okay, Giving Tuesday is coming up and people are looking for nonprofits to give to. And it's a huge day for people to donate. So I have a numbers question for you. This was
Sure.
the year of the election. These campaigns raised a shit ton of, as far as I'm concerned, wasted money. So $1 billion went to the Harris campaign. $1 billion. That's money that didn't go to homeless people, for example. So you know the numbers. In the election years, do nonprofits make less money?
So ironically, they don't make less money. And I think people should keep that in mind. In other words, it's a both and, although I will give you a couple of data points, but I think it plays out that if you care about causes, you're still going to support those causes. I think it's the individual taxpayer that may end the year with a little bit less money. But we ran a survey back in October with about 1,000 donors, and we're trying to see what's going on this year. Pre-election, are you going to be giving the same amount? Are you giving less? And I would say there was about a little over, it was like 52% said they were facing some challenge in terms of their income and they were probably going to give a little bit less. So that was not good. The other was about 15% were saying we're giving more to political campaigns and we are going to give less to nonprofits. So I'm giving you two different data points. Our query showed that, but historically, analysis on presidential election years has not shown a dip in giving to the nonprofit sector. What we are seeing, which is interesting right now, is that there's been a spike in giving as a reaction to the election results within specific categories and fairly predictable ones. Women's reproductive health, civil liberties, the environment, immigration rights, racial justice. It's fairly expected what you would see there.
And along Giving Tuesday, my therapist, who doesn't know what to do, she wants to make a donation, but she doesn't know what to do. She has $500 to give to mission of her choice. So we're just going to make this up. And her mission that she wants to give $500 to is, after school program for kids and literacy. How does she figure out where to give?
I would literally type that into a search on Charity Navigator saying after school programs. Probably the best way to do it is where, right? You do after school programs for, let's say it's for young girls. That query is going to give you something back, but if you go into more of an advanced search, you can actually localize on state. So let's say you want to do it in California, and then you can get more precise. But ultimately, we've set this up so that the search is going to get you closer. If you don't really know where to start, there are a couple of things we've got. It's like a where to give now list is more reactive. We have popular charities, which is more what's everybody else doing. That's less interesting, I think, on some levels. Best charities are really within very specific categories, whether it's immigration and refugees, animal rescue, climate change, military and veterans. And then the last thing that we've done, which is a new approach, which might be useful to your therapist, is no, and this is we just launched this in September, which is we're calling it Causeway, and it's the same idea as a mutual fund. So instead of giving to a charity, you're giving to a cause. And there are two things. So we have essentially a fund manager, so a dedicated staff person at Charity Navigator, who's balancing where does the money go. So take something like animal welfare. There are a handful of charities on that animal welfare fund. Your donation gets distributed to those organizations. We're updating the who's on the list, what are the ratios of how much they get from individual donations. We do that on a quarterly basis, and then we're also issuing a quarterly impact report on how the organization's doing. So we're kind of bringing funds into the options so that instead of having to pick one, you pick a cause.
So cool. Oh, I love that you're doing that. That's so cool.
It's new. We got it live in September. We're going to really be pushing it in Giving Tuesday and see if there's an uptake there.
Awesome. Michael,
Yeah.
I am so impressed by the changes you've made. The most important thing today that I learned from you is that overhead rule is gone, pretty much.
Yes.
And nothing makes me happier than to hear you say that. But I'm just so impressed with everything and how you rate nonprofits and all the things that we discussed. Thank you so much. And the fact, by the way, that you have to fundraise still cracks me up. Is there anything that you would like to leave with our listener that I didn't ask you?
It's two things. One is, we've talked a lot about feedback. Give us feedback, right? If you're in the nonprofit, we are here to be a partner with the nonprofit sector. The best way we can do that is we have a nonprofit portal, charitynavigator.org/portal. Nonprofits can supply data there. They will gain important resources about the ratings so that they can understand their ratings. We tell your story better when we have more of your data. Otherwise, we're just basing everything we have off of what you file with your 990. Pay attention to what you file with your 990. And then for the donors in the audience, it's follow your heart when you're giving, use your head to actually find the best organization, but then support them. And whether you're writing a check, whether you're actually volunteering or changing your entire life and joining them as a CEO, you got to take that action. So think about what you're doing and really make a difference with what you care about.
Fabulous. Well, Michael, thank you so much. I appreciate your story, how you got to where you are, all the amazing things you're doing. We need Charity Navigator in this space. And to the nonprofits out there, I really hope that you heard him, that you will reach out if there's anything that you're thinking. I want a 360 somehow included in this. And then to the donors, really, take a look, give to what you care about, and keep giving. Thank you, Michael, very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Matt.
So, what'd you think of our amazing guest, Michael Thatcher?
I am so blown away by this guy, and I don't know if we made enough of the fact that he is truly a Renaissance man. I think you mentioned it briefly, but like he was an oceanographer before working for Microsoft, and this was after he got a degree in dance and music from Columbia. Like, what? But I love that what he said was this sort of unique background and his multitude of interests are one thing he loves about Charity Navigator because it allows him to promote so many nonprofits that feed so many interests.
Yeah, and what I love is that he started a nonprofit and got out of it because he didn't want to fundraise. And now guess what? He's right back in it. And not only is he fundraising, doing that one thing he didn't want to do, but he's also helping nonprofits to fundraise. So I think it's really amazing how his life did like a true 180.
100%. And I also was just so taken with what a dedicated steward he is to the great responsibility that he has at Charity Navigator, knowing that people go there for information.
Yeah, agreed. And I know what the title of this show is, which is Nonprofit on the Rocks. So sometimes we can talk about nonprofits that are falling apart. And I do want to repeat, like I said on the show, just because we talk a lot about nonprofits that may be failing or may be in crisis does not mean that we shouldn't be giving. I have a lot of fun on this show, and I know we talk a lot of shit about people and nonprofits and all things, right? But at the end of the day, it's so important to give. Thanksgiving is such an important time to, again, be so appreciative of what you have and what people don't, and what nonprofits do to this world. So I think hopefully people will take a look at Charity Navigator, will take a look at the nonprofits that are out there and what they're doing and the impact that they're making. And we can continue another year of a substantial individual donation to nonprofits.
I have one more important question for you, Matt, and that is in between our introduction and the interview and now our outro, have you had a stuffing sandwich?
In between our intro and our outro, I'm going to tell you what happened today. I don't know if maybe one of our employees heard what I was saying. I have no idea, but somebody on the team brought in stuffing with sausage today. So I don't know what happened. I have no idea if there was talk in the office of me not being happy, but I got my stuffing with sausage, and I have to tell you, Ashley, it has made my day.
I love it, Matt. Maybe your employees have put cameras or listening devices in the offices of you and Allison so that they can make sure that they are, appealing to your every whim. Whatever it is, it worked and you got your stuffing.
I got my stuffing. So guess what, Ashley? What this episode did was it ended season 5 of Nonprofit on the Rocks. How do you feel about that?
I feel accomplished. I'm excited. Like, I think what a great episode to end on. Michael is amazing. And I think it kind of sets a really high bar, though, Matt, for season 6. Like, if Michael is the new bar, we're going to have to really dig to get some good guests for season 6.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. Think of where we are and just how many amazing guests we've had. So I'm really proud of this show, and I'm very thankful for you and for the show.
I am too, and I'm excited for season 6, and I hope everyone will tune in, and I hope they remember that all of our past seasons exist in perpetuity, wherever they get their podcasts, or you can find them at envisionnonprofit.com, where you can also learn about all the work that Envision is doing. Thanks, everyone.